Ready? Hey, Richard. Richard,
All right,
we need to get him
we're
going.
gonna go. Okay. Well, I'm gonna call this meeting to order. Thank you, everyone, for coming out tonight. The second item on the list today is adjournment, actually. So we're gonna postpone that one. Look at him, man, we're done. Okay.
We just thought it would help the meeting get over faster.
Yeah, right. So anyway, so we're gonna review and approve the agenda. I think there may be an item that we need to pull off of the consent agenda, but we'll talk about that then. And I know that we have a request that was otherwise not on our agenda, and so we'll do that sort of rolled into general business and appearances. And that's fine. But other than that, I think there had been some addendums, but I think they are all online. So,
Does the other half of the room like to have lights?
would you like the lights on?
Do you like the lights on back?
Just turn.
Okay, cool,
You look dark.
super.
Very dark back there. Okay, here we go.
Okay. Yeah. So we're gonna. So without any objection, we'll consider the agenda approved, and we have a very first item to go with general business appearances.
Yeah, could
Bill.
Chief Robert Gowans come forward? So I'm looking around the room, and I think I can tell, but quick show of hands, how many of you here are under 40 years old in this room? Okay, then for your entire life, Robert Gowans has been in the Montpelier Fire Department. We're going to present him his 40-year pin, serving us as a firefighter, deputy chief, and now chief of police. That is a long time to be dedicated to our city, and we appreciate all your work.
Thank you for all your work, Bob. Appreciate all you do. All right, so.
So when I told you had to come to the meeting tonight, now you can go.
Awesome. All right, so other general business and appearances.
Okay.
Oh, got it.
Yeah, nice work.
Is this working? Oh, there it is. Okay, we're back in business. Good evening. My name is Zach Hughes. I'm from the Prospect Street neighborhood. And I rise for many reasons tonight. And one of them is, first, I want to thank Chief Vakos over Montpelier Police Department for making himself available for our local standing committee at Washington County Mental Health right here in Montpelier. We spoke for about 45 minutes or 30 minutes or so, something like that. It was a long dialogue, and it was very productive, and we hope to continue the dialogue in general throughout the city as we continue to move forward and learn from the events of that early August morning. I want to thank Chief Vakos for that, and continue to show support for the Montpelier Police Department. Also, would like to announce that my volunteer-based organization, which I'll send information to you separately, has separate of the task force, I repeat, separate of the housing task force, has launched a street team which is dedicated to responding to needs of people on the street who may need such supplies as sleeping bags, tents, so on. So we are starting that out, little venture, and we've been getting donations here and there, which is good, and we'll continue to do that. So I just wanted to announce that. Again, that is separate of the task force, so I don't want there to be any confusion there. And once more, and I would like to just close by thanking the city of Montpelier for being open to the climate protests that we had last week. It was rather interesting, but I will say I appreciate the openness of the city. Thank you very much.
Appreciate if you put it over there so at least I can sort of see it.
Good evening, Richard Shear from Loomis Street. And I've come tonight on one of these questions that come every so often on, and that's information, getting information from the city in a timely basis and an organized basis. And I want to hearken back to one time that it wasn't me, it was my wife who was here, and the question was street closures for events. Which at the time was fairly haphazard. Events would show up and no one would know that the street was going to be closing downtown. And the city council put together along with the police chief, put together a form, and people circulate that form to those who are involved. And it's a process that works, and it works really well, and it works because it's predictable. You know exactly what's going to happen when. In terms of information requests that come in to the various city departments, particularly the city that's coordinated by the city manager. What I would like to see is you guys be informed of the information requests that are sitting before the city manager. Just a simple spreadsheet that comes to you saying, here is who the data request was from, here's what the data request is for, here's who's going to handle it, and here is the estimated time, and here is when I got back with that person saying what the estimated time would be. Just systematizing that process the same way that we systematize street closures. And I think a lot of the misunderstandings, the data is being withheld. No, data is not being withheld. But if you know when a date certain is that it will arrive, it just makes the system work smoother. And so I would recommend to council to recommend to the city manager a log that would go out, if not in public view, would go out to you guys with your city council preview package that comes before these meetings, so that you're on top of what the citizen concerns are that are coming to the city. I mean, you know when someone has touched Connor or Glenn or Donna or whatever, but you don't know the kinds of concerns that are coming to the department, and that helps you to really be better city council people, in my estimation as a non-city council person. And that is all I have to weigh in on tonight. And I think that was constructive.
Thank you.
Take care, guys.
Yeah, thank you, Richard.
Good evening. My name is Ken Russell. I'm a new member of the new Housing Task Force. And what did I just call it?
Housing.
That's related. So, Homelessness Task Force. Sorry. And whatever. And but thank you. I know almost all of you, but not all of you. And appreciate your good work and appreciate you letting me serve on this. We had a fantastic meeting. First meeting, a lot of good energy, a lot of focus, and a lot of adaptability. And we, at the end of that good meeting, we went around the table and how are we going to work together, how are we going to form, but we were like, there was a sense of urgency expressed unilaterally, and we came together of one mind with the request in front of you to open up the shelter early. We did not include the springtime, and Bill very astutely pointed out, well, maybe we should consider that as well. So we thank you for your consideration of this. And I just want to talk about acting in time. I went to graduate school. The biggest program they ever had there in public policy was acting in time. It was right after Katrina. And they brought in people from all over the country to talk about how does government respond in time to meet the needs of the people who are out there. And Steve Whitaker has done a lot of really good work and continues to do a lot of good work bringing this issue out. The people from the homeless community really doing a lot of fantastic work. People from the business community raising concerns, and people I've talked to in that community are interested in being part of the solution here. Thank you, Rick DeAngelis, for showing up to consider what opening the shelter early might look like. Steve put together some numbers there, and I'm sure you as the operator know what it would take to consider. And I just want to say this is a good example of a community taking care of itself, considering everybody's needs, acting with good process and mutual respect. And so that's all I have to say. Did you all know what I'm talking about?
I think we're going to get into it in more detail.
Oh, did I get up to the wrong point?
So this item came up so fast that it was not put on our agenda, nor was it added as an addendum. And what this means is that I think if we're going to, I'm not sure that you've been very, I would love for you to be just really clear about if you're asking the council
We're asking,
something.
okay.
And this is the item I was referring to about something has come up. We're going to deal with it during general business and appearances. So that's right now. So if you could be very clear.
Right.
as to
Does
what-
somebody have the language? Glenn, do you
Yes,
have the language in
I
front
think
of
I
you?
do. Hold on. And forgive me because I think part of this is my, I may have confused you with
Am
how
I-
it was distributed.
okay.
But yes, let me
You're
find the
cutting me
language and
slack.
get
You're
it.
cutting me slack. I appreciate it.
Delegate.
So, the Homelessness Task Force came up with a resolution. It was unanimously approved, and it was, here we
Do you have it, Rick?
Why don't you come up and share it?
Thanks.
Feel free.
Sorry.
I
This is, forgot the dog and the pony for this show.
Okay, I've got it. Okay. The Homelessness Task Force makes the recommendation that the city take any action necessary, including identifying available funds, to open up the Bethany shelter as soon as possible and staff it until the Good Samaritan contract begins. We believe that contract begins on November 15th. And that is the full text of the motion. And I will forward it to you, John, yes.
And I apologize. This is all happening very quickly. Our committee, Steve made this motion with 4 minutes to go of our meeting, and we pulled it off. And we appreciate the fact that we're sort of throwing stuff on out to you all very quickly. The charge of our task force was a longer-term perspective, but it did not preclude us acting more quickly. And there certainly folks in that room unanimously felt the sense of urgency to keep things moving with a dynamic action. So thank you for your consideration and understanding, and apologize for any clumsy steps.
That's all good. So, Gia, so just for clarity, actually, before we take this up any further, are there any other items for general business and appearances? Okay, so
Related to this or not related?
Separate.
not related to this. So I'm just checking to see if anybody else has anything else that they want. Okay, that's not related to this.
Yes, it's not related.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ken. We're going to circle back to this issue.
Hello, my name is Seth Collins. I live in Berlin, Vermont, and I would like to see the construction and implementation of a feminist neighborhood watch, as there's a serious problem with predators, obviously everywhere, but specifically my range isn't much greater than Montpelier, so I don't see or hear many other stories, but I hear a lot of literal horror stories, and I would like to see this council and all, sorry, I'm getting emotional, but all branches of government, of local governments to confront this. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, can he explain that to me? Maybe everybody else knows what he means?
No, if you want to ask
Could
some
you,
questions.
I'm
that's fine.
sorry,
I'm sorry. See, neighborhood watches probably went went the way of the wayside, and I don't know when, but they're not. You see a lot of signs that says your neighborhood watch. It has like an eye on them, and the signs are all worn down and not upgraded. But so I would like to see. Essentially, a neighborhood watch is a number of individuals. They sign up for it. They're given some sort of training, and I guess there's some sort of network where it's networked together in a web. So you would say maybe, I mean, Montpelier isn't broken up into blocks, but I believe it's broken up into districts. You'd have every district would report to an individual, then apparently possibly report to City Hall or to whatever government, and then that say it was someone, a dog was barking loudly, then that of course wouldn't get reported to the police. But if there was something where a crime, someone was being hurt, money was stolen or whatnot, then that would go on to the police and then be processed that way. It's sort of a way of bringing justice faster, because often in this town, there will be someone getting smashed through the wall of their own apartment, and then by then, then it becomes an issue. Well, in theory, this is only in theory. If there was a neighborhood watch, then theoretically these things would be some of these things would be intercepted before it got to the point where someone was in a serious risk of bodily harm or injury. And I'm sorry that was so long-winded, but
the essence
Yeah.
is what I'm hearing is that you
Okay.
want us to organize
Yes.
a neighborhood watch more formally with training, etc.
Yes.
Okay,
I mean,
I got it.
So
I understand. I
So
understand what
is
it
there some sort of a network? I mean, you were telling me you wanted to implement something in the future, but is there anything like that functioning at all now?
I don't believe so. And just to clarify, Seth and I had a conversation about reviving the capital area neighborhoods, excuse me, which is a thing that I would like to talk about when it comes to budget time. So that's something that, at least, moving into the future, that sort of idea could be wrapped into the capital area neighborhoods. But anyway, yeah.
Yes, I just wanted to put my spin on it, that it would be specifically, in my opinion, focused on intercepting predators and protecting the innocent, as to me, like, when people hear neighborhood watch, they don't automatically interpret it as that way. They more interpret it as looking out for people that are generally suspicious, when I would want this neighborhood watch specifically to target specific accounts specifically target rapists and imprison them or send them away, because this town, this town is too precious, and every town is too precious. Every life is too precious for us to let this happen. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, any other comments? General business and appearances.
I want to raise one that overlaps with a later one, but a number of folks in town have recollections from decades ago that a city center was being permitted, developed, improved, that there were conditions that those bathrooms be available to the public. Someone else even had recollections that the parking garage was to be accessible. I've made records requests to Bill, passed to Mike Miller, and I'm getting told now that I have to pay. I have to either, the onus is on me to go find those conditions, and I'm saying the onus is on the city. I've offered to search for them and create a searchable PDF, but the city should pay to scan that file so that it is searchable. But if the city is losing track of conditions just through staff turnover and time, it's pretty important that public restrooms not be lost in the fog of time. So I made the proposal to Bill that the city have them scanned as they did with the parking structure documents at Capital Copy, and I'll turn them into searchable OCR and do the research, no charge, to determine whether or not. There may be some handwritten stuff that needs to be transcribed, permit conditions that came out of development review, design review, but that's a pretty serious thing to overlook. And the fact that numerous people in the community have express this recollection means that I would kind of count on City Hall to keep track of it. I've separately had a conversation with our Public Works Director. The bridge needs some, the bike path bridge needs some signage. There's a young lady down there now who got hurt. The bike coming up the hill, you had to get her momentum up, and the turn came so quick she ended up hitting the rail. Separately, garbage is not being collected, and dozens of pounds of it are falling down the riverbank. There's not even a proper garbage can up there on the circulation route for the contract. Those are the most important, being that the next one is more important.
Sorry, Stephen, just before you go, which bridge are you talking about there?
Yeah.
The bike path bridge behind DMV. The so-called
Oh.
Pocket Park.
Next
And
to
that's the
Montpelier.
same place, I will remind you, where some of the homeless were harassed in the middle of the night. They had to have been staked out because there's no one around there to report a public urination, which was the alleged crime. But I believe we have some people, we've even got some vigilantes in town that are rousting people and saying, you can't sleep here in the middle of the night. So be aware that that happened yesterday or the day before with the vigilante. And we had a former cop reported twice to still be throwing his weight around here, harassing the homeless. So those are things that you should take very seriously, and no one, since I've mentioned them, has come back and asked for details, other than mine and Bill's colloquy.
Thank you. Any other general business and appearances? Okay, so circling back to the request that Glenn read, I'm sure there are some other folks. Well, so do you want to speak any more to that?
I think apart from not actually reading the resolution, Ken did a good job of expressing our unanimity and sense of urgency on the task force to at least try to get this service available as soon as possible. Beyond that, I think I would like to say that I really appreciate the work that Good Samaritan Haven is doing, and I'm very glad that the Bethany shelter has been open. And I want to be able to work together as much as possible to continue and expand that service as possible. I really appreciate the fact that both Rick DeAngelis and Rob Farrell from Good Samaritan have come tonight to share their sense of the possibilities and the information that they have on the shelter as it has been run. Beyond that, I know we're going to have some amount of conversation about this, and I guess I have a process question, whether it makes sense for me to make a motion at this point before we get further information, or whether we should have some open conversation first.
I think it's fine if you want to make a motion, and then I will say, though, it was not on our agenda.
Yes.
So I will say it does make me a little uncomfortable to have a motion,
Yep.
particularly around money that we did not warn.
Yes.
That feels.
I'm just going to be candid and
Yep.
put out there that I would make a motion to table, and not because I disagree with the idea, but because I think I've been sort of on my trope for a while about making sure that people have an opportunity to weigh in and participate. And I can see how some people might categorize this as stonewalling right now, but I feel pretty strongly that this is something that we really, as a community, need to have a real conversation about, and it's something that I want people, one, to be aware that the council's taking this seriously, and I feel it would be, it would undermine our integrity as an elected body, and, as people who are here to try to fix this, to sort of go about it in a way where we don't have a firm plan in place so that people can look at that and say, okay, I know that my council is working for me and working for those that are most vulnerable in my community. So I would ask that we like sort of, I feel a little blindsided and I don't feel well, so I apologize that like I'm a little off, but I guess I'm not really clear. So I caught the ask is that the city operate the shelter at Bethany Church between now and November, or whenever we would vote on it on November 15th. Is that?
Yeah, so the way it's worded and the way I understand it, we would be directing staff to find a way to open the shelter. That, in my mind, and as I understand the task force's idea is more or less however that works. I think that there is some probably some reasonable preferences for the city not to do any more than it has to itself. For example, if the city can assist Bethany, assist Good Samaritan to open earlier, that would be my personal, that would be fine with me. I don't know if that helps answer your question.
I guess. I mean, so I want to make sure. So in essence, it's a question. So the goal is we want to open the shelter ASAP.
Yes.
Is that okay?
Yep, that's
and
exactly
then
right.
The path to that is
Yes.
is what we are figuring out now. So yes, I would definitely make a motion to table.
There's no motion to table yet.
Well, there's no motion, Stephen, but I appreciate your candor and your commentary from there. But if you were to make a motion, I would certainly make a motion to table that.
Understood.
I'm going to, unless you want to respond. Lauren, you had something to say.
This all being new to me, I think the goal seems great and we should try to move forward expeditiously. I was just looking up the average temperatures in October at night and it's 27 degrees in Montpelier, so that seems cold for people to be out. I'm wondering process-wise, like do we at this point have a budget? How long would it take to get staffing up? And I'm wondering if we could put a request to Bethany Church or whoever the right entity to come back ASAP with a detailed proposal of how exactly this works, that we could then have publicly warn, have a process and improve, knowing exactly what we're signing up for.
I can respond to that. Just based on these inquiries, Bethany Church has said they would be willing to open. They don't provide staff themselves, so as long as whoever is funding and doing this, they would be willing to open earlier. And obviously they incur some of their own expenses and would like to be reimbursed for those, but they're not huge. And we've talked with Good Samaritan, and I think the real issue, so I'd be clear, we don't have the staff or resources, city, to do it if we were directed to do so, and I don't have any strong feeling why we wouldn't be, but we would want to have the people who are going to be running it all winter do it. So I think what we're talking about is how much does it cost for how many weeks, and appropriating that much money. That's really the issue. If the church is willing, and I don't want to speak for Good Samaritan, but their executive director is here, so I'll let him speak for himself, whether they're willing or have the ability to do it. That would be the most expeditious way to accomplish this, I would think.
So my understanding from the conversations I've had is that there is not a solid plan, though, for this to happen at least yet.
Should we just
Yeah.
say how prepared we are?
Sure, yes.
Yeah.
Steve, could you stand back from the microphone, please? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I was chosen to present from the homelessness task force.
Yep.
Mr. Whitaker doesn't respect boundaries.
You were done, and I had a different issue, a different angle.
My understanding is they're discussing right now whether to table the motion that
There's
I
no
presented.
motion. You didn't make a motion. He didn't make a motion.
Stand back, please.
Thank you. Okay, yes.
I'm Rick DeAngelis. I'm the board chair of the Good Samaritan Haven, and this is Rod Farrell, who's the executive director. We're really glad to see the interest for addressing the needs of the homeless. I've been in Montpelier for 30 years, and been involved with Good Sam for a long time, and it was always a Barry organization. And we were scratching our head, how do we develop interest in Montpelier? And lo and behold, here we are tonight. It's amazing. So that said, we are glad to try to, to work with this interest and to open the shelter earlier. It's logistically challenging, I'll say that. We have to hire staff. You need a lot of staff to fill in a graveyard shift in which you're awake all night. And maybe volunteers, but we find that it's usually better if we're hiring people for reliability and so forth. And then plus we have our own staff overhead and so forth. And then there are the costs for the Bethany Church. So we, back of the envelope, based on a few telephone calls, $7,000 to $10,000 for a month of operating the shelter. And we did talk with the state of Vermont, and we asked them if they could contribute and extend. We have a contract that'll be starting late in November, and they said no, but they said they might be willing to talk about whether there's some flexibility in that. But the immediate answer.
Can I ask you, is it your perception that there's, well, actually maybe this is a question for the task force, but is there a perception that there's a greater need on the front end of winter or on the back end of winter?
That's a great question. First of all, hi everyone. Thank you for having me. I would offer both.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? Yeah,
I'd
Dawn.
like him to repeat the cost. I heard 700?
7,000 to
Okay,
10,000.
okay.
And like I say, that's the back of the
10,000, thank you.
envelope.
Yeah.
We
Yeah,
came up
yeah,
with
no, no.
that.
I just
maybe
didn't
about
hear the
3
number,
hours.
obviously, so thank you.
Yeah, about 3 hours ago. So, but it is expensive. There's staffing, there's insurance, there's the Bethany's costs, and so forth.
Ashley.
It was profound in my mind. I'm sure I'll think of it in a moment.
It'll come back.
Yeah.
Yes.
I just wanted to say very quickly, if I could, in light of the circumstances of arriving at this conversation very late in the game, I do wonder if we're not better off thinking about extending the season and moving the direction of the conversation towards that, and then looking at next year opening up early.
It came to me.
Before we go, I just want to express sympathy with that idea. That now is, we could probably push to get something, ready for before November. But now is a great time to be planning for the spring and having conversation about next year. And two, I think just knowing what the situation is with the warming shelter and how it's been going, and are they meeting their needs, and what can be done there. So, thank you for that. And Ashley.
Yes. So one of the things that I feel as though I think a lot of communities have really fallen behind on is, we need a short-term solution, but we also really need a long-term plan. And one of the things that seems like, the money piece is something that we as a council have to make a decision about. I think, to me, that's a larger policy question, not just a $10,000 check question. But one of the things that has always sort of struck me as an area where communities really could step in would be, how do we, obviously this is a service that from my perspective we need, because I care about my community and I care about the most vulnerable members of my community, is sort of where are the deficiencies in terms of long-term planning around how to address food security, to address any sort of unmet physical needs, medical needs, all of those pieces that, frankly, as someone with a significant medical issue that's ongoing right now, thankfully I have learned how to advocate, for myself, but it strikes me that there is a lot of really challenging systems to navigate, and one way that I would really urge the city to engage in is, what do we have in terms of resources that, and I don't mean paper. Paper is super helpful because you have to fill out trash forms, and I'm going to call them trash forms because I've about had it with like forms to fill out for different medical providers or whatever. And, you know, one of the things, you know, I'm not comfortable just throwing money at a problem because I don't think that's what a council or a community can do to actually solve a problem. But I want to put on the radar that, to me, the $7,000 to $10,000 to get this up and running early is an imperative. I certainly want to make sure we have a solid plan in place, but I also want to make sure that this $7,000 to $10,000 is going to yield a net positive return for everyone who will be utilizing that. And so I don't want anyone here to think that throwing money at this and just opening this shelter is the answer, because it is so much more complicated than that. And I think that's another way where the city has lots of resources, you know, that we can use, and we have a lot of people who care about what happens here. And so I know Good Sam in Barrie does some work around that, and I think that we in Montpelier have a lot of resources at our disposal, and it would be short-sighted and frankly negligent of us to not think long-term about this. And the $7,000 to $10,000 is, frankly, from my perspective, an easier ask than the, you know, how are we going to meaningfully change some of these really problematic social structures that are in place that perpetuate the cycle.
You know, here. But for $7,000 to $10,000, you keep somebody alive and out of the cold.
Listen,
and
I get it.
And you can't do much more than that.
Yeah.
And that's what this emergency shelter system that the state has developed and encouraged basically does. Not a whole lot more. You can connect with some people and work with them on a service plan.
But
this is such a terribly complex structural problem that we have.
And whether that means a committee from the city, you know, organizing volunteers to like help fill out forms with people, or whatever it might be, or even just compiling a list of therapists who are accepting new patients, or treatment providers. I mean, I've been calling treatment providers and they're telling me 3 to 6 months for an appointment. I mean, that when you're talking to someone who has immediate unmet needs, that is insurmountable. I mean, what's the point in continuing if you're not going to get anywhere anytime soon?
So if I can just remind everyone in the conversation that when we formed the homelessness task force, I think in the draft of the memo, we talked about sort of the limitations on the city's ability to address all of the root causes of homelessness, and we charged the task force to come up with some short-term solutions that we could implement quickly, and then to do exactly what Councilmember Hill said, is then use the time to think about ways to and we specifically talked about ways to help people navigate the system and other things, and to think strategically, but also understand that, you know, the winter is coming, right? And it's going to get cold, and people are going to be out there. So I think it's consistent with. I think we agree that the city council agreed when it formed the task force with exactly what you're saying.
I'm just saying this is a really unique opportunity, though, that if we are able to figure out a way to move this forward, I see a way that this part could also kind of get wrapped up in a sense in that. And, you know, your time is your most valuable thing in life. That is what I have learned in my recent weeks. And, you know, as someone who has slept in a parking lot in my car before, like, $7,000 to $10,000 is a lot of money, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not a lot of money. But it's a meaningless amount of money if we aren't going to put our moral money where our mouths are and actually change this. And so, I don't see this as something for the council to, you know, take a backseat role in, because we set the tone. We set the tone for how we engage with our community and how we engage with members of our community who don't live the same way that we do. And I think that I wouldn't be comfortable voting for a plan just to approve a budget for this if there were to be a motion that came to a vote, but there would need to be like an actual, you know, this committee will come up with a list of and I see it as more of we need to do this. And so for me, any sort of funding request would also have that built into it, because a funding request by itself is just that, and it's only temporary.
Connor and then Donna.
Just two quick questions. So I think you said it already. How much earlier would this open the shelter? $7,000?
Yeah.
A month.
I mean, that, again, we're ballparking that figure. We figure about that much for a month of operation.
But don't hold him to it.
Well, I mean, we just found out about
I
this
know, I
yesterday.
know, I understand.
And Bill, easy question for you. Where would this money come from?
You know, I haven't had, this has been waiting for the number, but, so we'd have to look for it, but I suspect we could, you know, we could find it somewhere, I don't know, fund balance or something. I mean, it's probably within the margin of error of a paving project or something, you know, so.
I mean, I'll just say, like in our last budget, we appropriated some money for childcare at city council meetings. I don't think we're ready for prime time at that, so that's something I'd be willing to suggest we push back to next year. That's $2,000 right there, right? I don't know if we could add up to it like that.
Donna.
I know we haven't decided what our dates are for October, but I would like to direct staff as well as the committees to come back at our next meeting and for all of us, hopefully give us information before the city council meeting, and that we all come with more information and an idea of how to go along this path, which we are interested in doing, but we need the details.
How
Is
much
that a
lead
motion?
time would you need to get going?
To come up with a plan.
From the time we say go to the time you can open, how much lead time do you need?
We would like as much time as possible, at least a couple weeks at the very least.
So if you know, if our next meeting is October 9th or 16th and they want to open October 15th, I'm not trying to push this, I'm just
Yep,
want to make sure
yep,
people understand the consequences of the choices.
Regardless, I think it may make some sense nonetheless
call.
to ask folks to work together to come up with a plan, and knowing that I mean, I would trust your collective judgments about you know, whether that means, you know, we're meeting on the 9th and we're going to open in a week after or so, or if that means you know, the trade-offs are such that it makes more sense to do it for the extending the season or whatever. I will leave that to you. I mean, I don't know, was that a motion, Donna, by the way?
Well, yes, I was sort of put out there for a feeler, but it seemed to me, let's say we went to the next meeting, let's say for sake now, it's the 9th instead of the 16th. The committee would probably have to meet early if you meet only monthly.
We meet once a week.
Oh, meet weekly, okay, so that's great. So that would give everyone 2 weeks, and I think that's what we need, information. And likewise, Bill can help nudge the budget and give us some ideas there, and let us get really real about this.
I also want to add,
motion.
if I
I'm
could.
sorry. Was that a motion, Donna?
Okay, John, I'm talking to you, all right. So the motion is that the city council puts this item on its October 9th agenda, or the very first October meeting we have, but I'm hoping it's the 9th, and that the committee and the providers will come forth with more information and more clear numbers. And likewise, staff will come back with more options of where we could find money should we decide we want that. Is that
Second.
clear enough, John?
I may have to go back and check that.
Okay.
I think it had multiple seconds, though.
We can
Um,
co-second. I'm cool with that.
It looks like you both have something to say.
And I just want to, we have a ground rule that there can be dissenting opinions. I was asked to present, Steve obviously has lots of thoughts on this, which is great. But I do acknowledge this was an ad hoc, last-minute thing, so it was with goodwill and shared sense of urgency on the issue. I think we can work well together. Steve did send some numbers to me, which I sent to Bill, based on his math, and of course the operators of the shelter are the ones who really understand what it takes, but they appreciate considering the advocate position on this. Steve, thank you.
We busted our rear ends to get the numbers to Bill in time to meet the 24-hour agenda threshold before this meeting. So the fact that nobody has the numbers that were prepared, it was about 8,400 without this. I did speak to Pastor of the church, Amy, and they have no intent or awareness that this is going to be a recurring year after year thing. They did it as a one-time thing, and now they're being asked to like pick up the slack. And their board met last night to consider this request. Apparently, they granted this request to open early. But the fact that you had the numbers and that we've got pregnant couples, disabled people sleeping in the streets, and you're going to kick this can down the road because the numbers weren't circulated from Bill to the city council?
So I got to interrupt you here, Steve. I got numbers from you that you calculated that you said.
I pulled them directly from the Good Sam budget with OEO, the contract.
I understand that. I spoke to Mr. Farrell this morning after receiving your numbers, and he said, I don't have numbers yet. I'll have them at the meeting.
Okay, but
So-
we don't
so
have to
I-
use Good
I-
Sam. We could hire people that have done this service before.
Well, we can argue about it or not. I'm telling you that I relied on the organization who provides the service to provide me with budget numbers. And as of about 9 o'clock this morning, he told me he did not have them and would have them at this meeting tonight.
Okay, but
I
this is
appreciate where you got yours, and in fact, they match.
This is part of the problem, is that
Stephen, I apologize for interrupting you because I hate being interrupted myself, but I'm going to ask you this question. Is your goal to make this happen, or is your goal to argue about who is right?
my goal is to make it happen immediately.
Well, immediately is not an option right now. So the option is we can either collaborate all together, or we can continue to waste time and fight.
There's enough hot air in this room to keep these people warm.
Well, Mr. Whitaker, maybe there is a bit of self-reflection that needs to happen there as well.
Okay, there are people who are not allowed into the Good Sam system. There are people who have a no, I met one tonight who is under a 12-month no trespass order at the Bethany Church just for having slept under a bush and with no warning. So there's all kinds of holes in the system. So for y'all to think that, you know, the provider has this all wrapped up is absurd. You know, I've done records requests. The provider's not willing to share where the $500,000 that they spend goes. That's a problem. There's an accountability problem. We need to look at other opportunities to staff these emergency
Okay,
shelters.
well, I am telling you that the city is not going to be able to pull together staff in 2 weeks to staff a shelter unless it's through an established shelter provider, period. I'm also telling you that no matter what system or who's providing it, there will be people who fall outside the cracks. It's sad, but it's what happens. There are going to be people with no trespass orders. There's going to be people who misbehave. There are going to be people who get kicked out of places. It's unfortunate, but regardless of who's providing it, that's going to happen. It's not going to be a one-size-fits-all. As I understand it, the rules at Bethany are looser than the ones in Barry and are more accommodating to people, and that has been happening for the last 2 years, okay? The city council, the elected officials here of the city have said they want more time to study this and get better numbers and get a recommendation of where the money's coming from. They haven't voted, but that's where they're headed. Arguing over whether they had the money or not, but for you to say we had numbers, we didn't have numbers from a credible source, and that is no disrespect intended to you.
I'm a credible source.
All right, so there's a motion and a second on the table. Any further discussion, and then I'd like to move on. Yes.
I'm afraid I feel like I'm in a difficult position, and I also want to apologize to the council that this did come up so quickly. Part of that, I think, is certainly something that I can take some credit or blame for. At the same time, I feel, and forgive me, Ken, if I'm stepping on your toes here, but I think I would be doing the task force a disservice if I did not reemphasize, in words other than Stephen, our shared sense of urgency. And from what I've heard so far tonight, the council is fairly unanimous, although we haven't heard from every last person, on wanting this to happen as soon as possible. I've further heard that the Good Samaritan folks are willing to work with us, and that the number is not likely to be large. Given that our October meeting certainly may be delayed by a week. I would prefer to move ahead immediately, get council agreement to ask Bill to start working on this now, so that we can start on the 15th with no problem. Again, I have trouble with who makes motions when and how to do it best, but if I can, I'd like to make a motion that we
You can't make a motion, right?
can't make a motion. Okay. So in that case, I would move to amend the current motion to approve the Homelessness Task Force's recommendation as it stands and move forward as soon as possible.
Is there a second?
Can we repeat the current motion on the table? Yeah.
John's going to repeat it. I mean, then
To approve the homelessness task force recommendation as it stands and to move forward as soon as possible.
do you mean
It's an
that's the amendment?
Yeah, it's an
Or
amendment.
Did you mean
So
Donna's?
it would.
She meant the original motion.
Yeah, the original.
All right, now that's the one that went on a long time and I didn't get it. I'm going to have to go back to the tape.
The core
and check.
suggestion was that the council would be looking at this.
Direct staff.
We were going to be looking at this
Yeah.
because we're going to get feedback from the committee in 2 weeks, and from the providers, and from the staff to look for the money.
And I would just mention in the future, because you guys are big rambly with the motions, under Robert's rules, the motion needs to be tight enough that theoretically the presiding officer can repeat it back before the vote. And these motions that go on forever, I cannot
Well,
capture
there
them.
are
I have to
three
go back
parts
the
to my
tape.
motion, actually four. That the next meeting, city council will consider funding additional time at the homeless shelter, but we need to hear from the committee, from the providers, and from staff. Is that clear enough, John?
Oh, it's clear, I just
Okay.
don't have the exact language.
I was
because
trying
it
to give
went
you
on
some
a very
exact
long time.
short.
So that's a change to your motion. I did not understand that, I'm sorry.
If you prefer it, even, I was trying to make it real quick.
Well, then you'll have to give it to me again, because it sounded like you were just explaining your motion. I'm serious.
Okay,
I mean,
okay.
I don't know
No,
how else
no.
to tell you.
No, okay. So likewise, that at the October 9th city council meeting,
You may not want to tie it to a date.
at the next October city council meeting,
Fair enough.
Okay.
we consider the request to fund the opening of the homeless shelter early. And that, at that October meeting, we hear from the homeless shelter committee, task force, I'm sorry, get the right name, task force, the providers at Bethany, and from the staff on sources for funds.
Okay. So at next October city council meeting, we consider the request to fund the opening of the homeless shelter early, and at that October meeting, we hear from the homelessness task force, the providers at Bethany, and from the staff on sources for funds.
Does that answer your question, Connor? Is there, so Glenn made an amendment, is there a second? Okay, so hearing no second, the amendment dies. And so there's a motion on the table, which is Donna's motion, which is what was just read. Lauren, did you have something to say?
I think sort of a question. So if we don't vote on this until October 9th or 16th, like obviously it sounded like there was a number of steps that need to happen of pulling together a plan and a budget. If the goal, it seems like there's general agreement that we want to move in this direction and we want to provide the service for longer. Like what would be held up by if we don't officially approve this until say October 16th? Like what kind of timeline would it then take to post jobs or do whatever it would take? I'm just curious how long are we?
They said 2 weeks.
Well, I heard 2 weeks to kind of prepare the materials to like get a real solid budget and plan in place. But then I assume also there's like posting jobs and things that then happen. So I'm just wondering if we wait for beyond, if it's 3 weeks from now or whatever, like how far are we pushing things before like we'd actually be able to open? I don't know if that's an answerable question.
So when I said 2 weeks, it was in the spirit of having a very ambitious goal and a sense of urgency that I'm feeling in this room. We welcome the opportunity to collaborate with everyone here in this room and very much hear the folks of all differing opinions. We would be hard pressed to open up the shelter in 2 weeks. I cannot be any more clear about that. 2 weeks to come up with a solid plan, and then, you know, we are actively already hiring for the shelter, but it'd be very difficult for me to come before this council and say we'd be ready to go on the 15th of October.
Jack.
And that's if we approved you now.
I'm sorry?
And is that if that is the, and are you saying it would be difficult to do it for October 15, even if they said go right now?
It would be a very ambitious date, yes.
Did you have something to follow up?
So just so I'm clear, so this timeline for what, from your perspective, it will take to actually make this happen anyway, this doesn't really slow down anything, assuming, you know, if we then vote at the next meeting to approve this, it would kind of be happening on this timeline anyway? Or,
Yeah,
or are you somehow hamstrung in anything that you would otherwise be doing if we don't, with this motion?
Yeah, I would leave this room with the same sense of urgency that I walked in with, in that if I could put together a team and everything that goes involved with opening the shelter on October 15th, we certainly would. However, we just are not in the position to make any guarantees right now.
Thank you. Jack, did you have something?
Yeah, I was going to say two things. One, I think that it's clear that you can tell from the discussion of the council that there's a sense that we want to make this happen as soon as possible, and so you're not going to wait until our next council meeting to start doing the things that then starts the 2-week time period you're thinking about. And so as a good manager of a organization, you're going to be working on what can be done to put you in a position to do this work. I also want to say, in my professional work, I've been had connection ties with and worked with people at the Good Samaritan Haven for decades, and I think that they have done great work. You have done when there were problems with the city of Barry and zoning and everything. The Good Samaritan Haven stood up to the city to make sure you could provide the services that you need to provide. I was at the event last Friday night. I think it was a good event, a good cross-section of the community and people that I have never seen at that kind of event before. And I think that Rick was right, that this kind of outreach to get support from people who live in Montpelier is an important part of what you do. The Good Samaritan Haven is an organization that needs money and needs to raise funds to provide services. And I don't think the criticisms made in the handout that we were just given have any validity whatsoever. I'm going to support this motion.
I'll make a commitment that we'll get out the financial information as soon as we can. We won't wait till the next meeting. So if we can put together, where we think we can get it, or if we can't, we'll get that out as early as possible so that planning can move ahead.
Any further discussion? Okay, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, thank you. And really, thank you to the committee for all of your work on this. I mean, even though it's maybe not as fast as you'd hoped, I mean, it's without you, it wouldn't probably be happening at all. So very grateful. Look forward to hearing more from you all. Thanks.
Sorry, it wasn't what it should have been on
It's
time.
okay. No, it's fine. I understand. And thank you for your graciousness. Okay.
So before we start the agenda,
Yeah.
one other thing, I was so excited to give Bob his pin that I was remiss to introduce Lisa Maxwell, our new Executive Director of the Montpelier Development Corporation, who's here visiting us this week. For those who haven't met Lisa, she's here spending her week in Montpelier and clearly knows how to have a good time. And so you're starting in full in the beginning of November. We're looking forward to having you here, but even in the interim, she's been great to work with. So looking forward to having her.
Thank you for recognizing me. And welcome, Lisa. All right, so on to our regularly scheduled agenda.
And Mayor, I just
Yeah.
wanted to let everybody know, I had reached out to you earlier. I am going to leave at some point during the meeting. I have surgery scheduled for next week, so if our meeting is the week after that, if it is, I will be here for at least one topic, but I just wanted to put out there that if I get up at some point,
It's okay.
it's anticipated.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, so on to the consent agenda. Was there, did you want to pull a particular item?
Is Donna here? I know we're having a major water leak now.
Oh,
So I guess I just want to quickly pull, yeah, I'm getting Rex's just here.
Yeah.
We just want to quickly pull, and I don't even know if you need to really pull it, but I want to mention the Berry Street night paving. We did discover that we had neglected to send notices. We noticed the people from Granite Street to Main Street, where the mayor and others live, but not from Granite Street out, which is actually where the paving is going. But there aren't that many residents there, but nonetheless, there are residents. So we were going to suggest that but we'd like to stay on schedule, that you approve this, but that with the condition that we notice, and we're actually going to get the notices out tomorrow. But before you heard about it, that we hadn't provided notices, we realized today that we hadn't, and we wanted to make sure that you knew that we knew, and that we're owning up to it, and we're going to fix it.
So perhaps, so that's item C. Do you want to certainly?
Or we're going
Just
to
a-
do it, so you don't necessarily need to pull it if you
Okay.
don't want to, but we wanted to make sure that it was addressed, that
Okay, that we're going to.
the notices are
Send
going
those
out
notices.
ASAP.
Anything else about the consent agenda?
I just mentioned that the minutes from the meeting, the last regular meeting, Peter Kelman's name has been corrected to be spelled correctly, and the correct name of the Social and Economic Justice Committee is now up.
Okay, thank you. Is there a motion regarding the consent agenda?
So moved. I move we approve it.
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. So that passes. So on to the zoning. I know we advertised it for 6:40, and we are 45 minutes behind. I'm sorry. Welcome, Mike Miller, our planning director.
All right, good evening, and I'm Mike Miller, I'm the Director of Planning for the city. And so I won't go through the whole deal again. To keep things brief, we've gone through this a number of times. So this is the second public hearing for the zoning fixes. The only change that I wanted to make sure I pointed out was that shortly after the last public hearing we had, and this was, I believe, Jamie emailed it out to you, and we put it on the web with the list. There was a map error that was found at 242 Elm Street. It's one of these things that under the zoning rules, we would be able to go and say, lines that are intended to follow property lines shall be interpreted as following property lines. In this case, we found one that when they were drawing the line, they followed the outside of the barn and not the property line, so it's in the wrong place. So we're going to interpret it correctly anyways, but we figured with the open hearing, we would just go through and say it's just a technical fix, it's not a substantial fix, but that we would correct that map as well for that one parcel. And if there were any questions on that, I could answer it. But other than that, everything has been online, all the red line changes, if there are any other questions.
Jack?
Did we open the public hearing?
No, but let's do that now. Thank you. We're going to officially open the public hearing. So this is the second reading of the zoning changes. Thank you. Any other questions regarding the zoning? Okay. Any comments from the public? Okay. Oh, yes.
Good evening, Joe Castellano, 3 Sabin Street, Montpelier. And I was made aware this afternoon that Phyllis Rubenstein had sent some comments, an email to you, and I just want to make sure that you shared those comments with the council.
I certainly did not, because I've basically not been able to check my email since, I teach between
Yeah.
1:30 and 3, and then basically have wall-to-wall meetings until I come here. So, I mean, I was at a meeting at 3:30, so I've not even read this email. I saw I had an email from someone named Phil, or Philip. But I could forward them to people now, if you would like.
I can also just read them off my phone if
That
you
would
want.
be fabulous.
Okay. This is verbatim. Dear Ann, I was unable, and this is on behalf of Phyllis Rubenstein, who lives over on College Street. I was unable to attend the city council meeting 2 weeks ago and am unable to attend tonight. As a resident of the College Hill area, I am writing to voice my objections to the proposal by Casey Ellison to modify the zoning districts in Saban's pasture. The parcel in question is a fully wooded hillside, very much unlike the open pasture in the Zorzi tract. I attended the community meeting Dr. Ellison held at the Kellogg Hubbard Library in the summer, at which time she shared that she is not obtaining bank financing for the proposed bathhouse. She was also unaware that she would need to have access to the building for emergency vehicles. She plans to build a 45-car parking lot below the building site on the wooded ridgeline and seems unaware that the slope of the pasture makes it unsuitable for such an impervious structure. She hopes to get an easement from the Zorzis for a portion of the street driveway from Berry Street to the parking area, but she had not yet contacted the Zorzis. She has no concrete plans for Phase 2, the proposed building of apartments or commercial space on Berry Street. She suggested that she would have to obtain financing for Phase 2. I am concerned that Dr. Ellison lacks the knowledge and skills of the developer and project may well fail. Assuming the city council changes the zoning lines and the project subsequently fails, the property will remain open for development in ways not allowed under current zoning regulations. Please share my concerns with the council members. Thank you.
Thank you for
Okay.
sharing that. Any further comments from the public? Yeah.
I'm curious to know what exactly structure this person wishes to build. If it were these $400 a month housing units, then I would be all for her building something like that.
I think all of that is, there's no proposal yet on the table, so that's all sort of yet to be discussed. And this is really just about what will be allowable on that space. Yes, so all to be future conversation, but thank you for raising it. Okay, any further comments? Okay, so I'm going to close the public hearing. And I think at this point, we could use a motion regarding the zoning changes.
I move we approve the proposed zoning changes as presented tonight with amendments.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Further discussion?
I would make an amendment that we approve the zoning changes and separate the request to change the property line
On the VCFA.
on the VCFA property.
Is there a second?
So removing that particular piece from the other zoning proposals.
Is there a second? Okay, so the motion, or the amendment fails for lack of a second. Any further, yeah, Jack?
I understand the concern raised by Phyllis Rubenstein. My opinion is that those concerns are not really zoning concerns, they're really permitting concerns, and if the property owner applies for a permit to construct this project, there will be plenty of opportunity for that project to be reviewed. And so I'm going to support the amendment, or support the motion as I articulated it.
Further discussion? Okay, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed?
Nay.
Okay, so the motion passes. Thank you. And thank you for all of your work. And
Okay.
yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, so we have a couple appointments to be made. One to the Community Fund Board. And Michael is here. If you want to come up and tell us about, I know you've introduce yourself before, and we all know you, but
Michael Sherman,
nonetheless.
live in Montpelier on College Street. I'm not going to take a long time because you're behind schedule, but just want to bring to your attention that what has happened with the Community Fund Board, and I was initially very skeptical about it, but I think what we have done is helpful to the citizens of the city. We've been careful to create a uniform application so everybody's on the same, doing the same thing at the same time in order to get their money. We've also created, I think, a good standard for accountability so that we know and therefore the council knows how the money that's been appropriated from city taxpayers is being used and that it's fulfilling the obligations that people take on with their applications. I've been on, this is the end of my first term. I've been totally active with it. It's a very short period of time that we work. It's intensive, but then we're done, and you have a budget item to put on the budget. And I would very much appreciate being appointed again. Thank you. And I'll answer any questions if you have them.
Any questions? Okay. Is there a motion regarding this appointment? Connor?
Yeah, I'll move we reappoint Michael Sherman to a 3-year term on the Community Fund Board.
I'll second.
Further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you for your work in this and so many other areas. Okay, so the other appointment that we have is to the Central Vermont Regional Planning Commission. Kirby Keaton was stepping down as the rep, and I think it was Marcella Dent who was stepping forward for that. And you're here. Do you want to introduce yourself? I know you have before again, but
Again.
Hi, my name is Marcella Dent. I'm new to the Planning Commission, but just in discussion with the current members, this is general practice, and in the past, it's been helpful for, I think, us and CVRPC to have a member of the Planning Commission be appointed to the Central Planning Commission, and so I have the availability and interest to do it, and I can try to answer questions if you have any.
any questions? Donna?
I'm pleased that you've volunteered. I would hope, do you think you could make time to come back to the council or send like emails? I'm on the Regional Planning Transportation Task Advisory Committee, and I try to give the council like a report once a month. And even if you could just email me, but I would love for us to be in more communication personally, since I'm on the task force.
Yeah.
And likewise for the council to hear more about what the Regional Planning Commission is doing.
Sure.
So
yeah.
that's doable?
But that sounds doable. If there's interest, I'm
Okay.
happy to. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you. Jack?
I was kind of surprised the way this came to us. Has it historically been the practice that the Planning Commission makes this nomination to the Regional Planning Commission?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay,
Yep.
great, and I'm happy that we have people who are willing to do not only the work they're doing on the Planning Commission, but extra work, like signing up for another commission.
Don't scare her away.
Right.
All right, is there a motion regarding this appointment?
I move we appoint Marcella Dent to the Regional Planning Commission.
Second.
I'll second.
Further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, thank you so much. All right, Confluence Park. So I know Roy and Ricarda are here to talk about that, so welcome. And I know Donna was at the presentation last night as well as I. Yes.
How hard would it be to get the PDF on here?
I don't know, what do you think?
Do we know?
Do you have
Thumb drive?
do you have a thumb drive?
No.
No.
So I don't, it doesn't, that answers my question. It is not necessary. I just thought if we
Okay.
wanted to have the design up there, but
Sure.
I think we're good. So Ricarda Erickson with the Vermont River Conservancy, and we have been contracting with Malone and McBroom, and Roy Schiff is the water resources engineer with Malone and McBroom, who have been doing a conceptual design for the Confluence River Park. The Confluence River Park, as you may know, is the proposed park at the confluence of the North Branch and main stem of the Winooski Rivers
on the city-owned transit center lot. And we have had a series of public meetings and input sessions, and I don't feel I need to go into depth now, but I'm happy to answer any questions about the background and the process. But what we're here for tonight is to present to you this Concept E, the final conceptual design of the Confluence River Park, and to ask you to commit city staff and potentially resources to move into the next phase. And this is what's considered 10% complete in a design completion spectrum. And we would like the next phase would be to get to 75% completion. And we would like to, Vermont River Conservancy would like to work with city staff to look into funding opportunities to fund that second phase and look into funding the construction of this park. So that is our ask to you, is to have the city commit to this second phase, to commit to moving forward with the Confluence River Park by having city staff work in collaboration with the Vermont River Conservancy, and to commit to an yet to be defined amount of funding to put into as perhaps a match for this second phase.
Can I add to that?
Sure, please.
I was thinking about this the other day in terms of the traffic study that we just did, where there was an outside consultant that came to us and they had a plan and some visions, and then there was sort of this question about, like, would we be is this the vision? Is this where we want to go? And I think if this is sort of like our, as a city, do we want to commit to this as the vision? And all that it entails to try to move forward with that vision, knowing that we've got some fundraising to do. I hope that captures it also. Or is it maybe an addendum to that, to what you said?
Yeah, if I could just add 1 minute. So been a resident of Montpelier for 15 years on the Conservation Commission, was really excited to work on this project professionally. But actually the most exciting part was we've been for about a year doing outreach with all the city departments, commissions, and the public. We've done public survey, and this is the 5th concept that has slowly whittled its way down. So we feel pretty good about the main elements in this design. People want ADA access. People want to recreate in the river in the future when the water quality is better. Want a performance space, want the bike path, integrated canoe access, and so on and so forth. So the data and the design and the initial work and the planning are really there. And, you know, as Ann said, I think adopting this as the concept that the public sort of put forward, and with guidance from most of the departments in the city that will have an interest or of some vested interest in this area is exciting, and hopefully you'll support that and move forward with us.
Any questions from the council, comments, etc.? Don?
Well, I'm very excited about this, and I've been to several of your presentations and know that you have listened and you have incorporated things, and you're still listening. People wanted to get into the next stage last evening. I'd like to make a motion that the city accept Concept D as our vision for our river parks and a way to lead forward.
Are we calling this one D?
E.
E.
Oh, E, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm looking at, okay.
You may.
Concept E, John
Concept E.
Odom.
Is there a second?
Second.
Further discussion? Ashley?
I guess I'm just curious, so the commitment is, I would hazard a guess, probably there. In terms of, you know, what the next thing is, I can't imagine all you need from us is commitment, because if that's all you needed, like, that would be, this would have been done years ago. So what practically are your next steps if the council were to approve this concept?
So speak from the Vermont River Conservancy, and then Roy can talk about the design. But the next steps would be for Vermont River Conservancy to work with city staff, and I imagine Kevin Casey, or a fundraising staff member, to look into funding opportunities. We are at the point now where it is, if we want to continue the process, we need the municipality to commit to this project. There are funding opportunities that only the municipality can apply for, that a nonprofit cannot, or there are funding opportunities that need to demonstrate that strong level of partnership. So in order to move this project forward, that's the level of commitment we need for the city to say this is a city project. It doesn't mean you are committing to any specific design. We are not near shovel ready, nor does it say, is it a level of a commitment to a certain dollar amount for the final project. It is simply a commitment that, yes, as a city, we are moving forward. We want this. We want to do our best effort to make it happen.
And it's fair to say that the design yet can still shift potentially based on that further research, and as we go along, things may change.
Right. So in the design world, Roy, I don't know if you want to speak to that more.
Yeah, I mean, Ricardo mentioned this. So this is a concept design. It's really about programming and asking people what they wanted to do in this space and doing feasibility work. Can we get ADA accessibility to these two rivers? And the answer is yes. And here's a concept to do that. But there will be a lot of design moving forward. Actually, the bulk of it, what are the materials this thing's made of? What local artists will put a sculpture where? And those are the things that all have to be hashed out in a next phase or two of the project before a couple years down the line this thing gets built and we have this great park sitting in the center of our city.
Donna.
Well, the term you used last evening is, this is only 10% of the design work. And I purposely said vision and concept in the motion, and I wanted to separate directing staff to work with them, just to keep it a cleaner motion. But I do know we need to then do that. But that's why I did the motion.
Once it becomes a project that's in our pipeline, then
Yeah.
that's what we'll do.
Yeah.
Great. Jack.
I think this is great. I think over, historically in cities across the country, the waterfront and the lakefront has been an industrial setting.
Wasteland?
Well, I wouldn't say wasteland. I'd say it's been an industrial resource because of how cities have developed. And so what we've seen, at the Burlington waterfront, in a lot of other places, including here now, is the idea of taking that industrial setting and something that's really not at all attractive or inviting to people, and turning it into something that people want to spend their time on. And so I'm really glad to see this.
I know a lot of people think of State and Main as the center of town, but I actually think of this location as the center of town in a different way, in a certain sense. And it's a very small parcel, but it's really important. I'm really excited about this. So there's been a motion and a second? There was a second.
Yes.
Any further discussion? Any comments from the public? Okay. All right. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Thank you for all of your work, and looking forward to next steps.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. You want this? The big one. You like the big one?
The big one.
So are we going to take a break or not?
Would you like to take a break?
Well, I mean, I'm going, but it's nice.
Would anybody else like a break? Okay, let's take a 5-minute break. This is, I think, a good opportunity to take a little break.
apologize for. I
No
didn't
problem.
mean to blindside you.
No, it's okay. And you
Reading it
read
out
them into
loud,
the
that's
record,
perfect.
so it's great. Thank you.
See ya.
Okay, so we are going to come back from our break. So we are on to reviewing the Chapter 7 ordinances. So this is the fourth public hearing. So I'm going to open up the public hearing regarding Chapter 7. And I have only one comment. on this.
Good work, staff.
Yes. My one comment was, I'm looking at Chapter 8. I need to look at 7. Okay, under 7.1, decaying matter. I'm so glad that we are allowing composting, vermicomposting, pit composting, trench composting. One question I had was, is this a thing to have a government-sanctioned composting bin or vessel? I know we talked about that last time. I just don't know where we landed on that. And also, technically speaking, maybe I'm just speaking as a science nerd, but decaying material still would incorporate like the fermentation of things. So I'm worried about that we're banning fermented stuff. Yeah, well, kimchi, sauerkraut, etc.
I'm all for banning those things. That's nasty.
Home kombucha.
So Bill, are you
Getting
including,
banned.
just out of curiosity, are you including beer in your offer banning then?
Also
All right.
fermented. No winemaking.
As long as distilling's good.
Yeah, right. Can't, that's an
Well,
interesting
could we
question.
just say decaying material, parentheses, except for fermentation purposes?
Sure.
What were your added words, Bill?
Except for
Except for
fermentation.
fermentation purposes.
Oh, okay.
Decaying material, parentheses, except for.
Yes,
Okay.
that would be fine. That would make me happy. And
Not
then,
including kimchi and sauerkraut.
because we're definitely banning those. Jack.
A couple of things should be clarified even further to say except materials being fermented for human consumption.
Well, that's what I was trying to get at.
That,
So,
I like that.
Okay.
yeah, good point.
Yeah, that's fair.
So I move to amend it, to amend 7.1 to include those words.
Second.
So this is just about amending this part of it, to be clear. So further discussion.
And do you have that, John? Okay.
Okay, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, great. And yes, Jack.
Did you have something else?
Well, I just was circling back to this idea of government-sanctioned composting bins or vessels, but I don't mean to make a big deal out of that. I don't know if we did check in on whatever that means. Great, but if not,
I think that's a good point because, I've got one of those compost tumblers in my yard. I never went to the government and asked if it was okay. So,
If you stick your head deep inside, maybe there's a seal on it from a government agency. But I don't think so.
I don't think so.
I sort of wondered if that was referring to, I mean, at a certain scale, it becomes government regulated, or at least state regulated, but I assume this is smaller than that, so.
Can we just strike it?
Yeah, Donna.
What do you call the larger ones? The condominium near me has a large composting bin, much bigger than personal use. And I presume it's regulated through the trash hauler. So I assume there's regulations there.
So, and if it's big enough for the state to sanction, maybe that's, yeah. I would be
Okay.
for just striking the words government sanctioned, unless there's a good reason to include it.
I move we strike those words.
Second.
Okay, for the, Lauren?
Just as long as we're not somehow inadvertently making it illegal to have a, like, composting facility here. Do the other words, pit or trench composting or so now we're only allowing personal use composting if we delete that whole thread? Or are we just taking out the word, a composting bin or vessel?
So.
I mean, I might say like, or a government sanctioned facility. Those are, I think, regulated.
Sure.
So I think, maybe I misunderstood the thrust, but I think what I was intending with my motion was to strike the two words government sanctioned, so that now it will read, this section shall not apply to the maintenance of a composting bin or vessel, pit or trench composting or vermicomposting for personal use, plus the language about, wait, no, that's somewhere else. That's a decaying matter. That's earlier in the section. Excuse me.
I read that to say, like the big facilities is not a bin or vessel, and then the rest of it is all qualified by for personal use. So I think we might be taking out the ability to have, I mean, it's usually just like slabs of concrete and there's piles and they do all this management to it. It's not.
So what if we said, what if we just moved that part? So, so that this section shall not apply to maintenance of a government-sanctioned composting bin or vessel, pit or trench composting, vermicomposting for personal use or other state-sanctioned composting facilities. Would that work for you? No? It's okay. All right.
While we're on that sentence, I'm a little concerned with the semicolon before or vermicomposting. It's not clear to me whether for personal use applies to all the items in that list or just vermicomposting for personal use, which I don't think is what's intended.
You think it's intended to be personal use as applied to all of it?
That's what I assume.
Okay. Don?
But these big bins aren't for personal use. The hauler takes them away and sells them to a composting company.
Yeah, and I don't know what pit or trench composting is. Whether by its nature that is something that's not for personal use.
All the ones I've seen they're more the homemade jobbies that Lauren was talking about. You dig it in and you put leaves over it and sawdust and.
The thing is, I think you can also have a bin that's not just for transfer. You can have a bin that's,
That
like,
does the work?
Yeah, like you were describing,
Like
Jack,
those
the tumbler, that kind of
The
thing.
tumbler.
Would we consider that a bin, maybe? Probably.
Yeah.
So do you have any suggestion about that, Jack?
What if you put an "and" before pit? And it separates the larger bin vessels to the smaller that are related to personal household use.
Well, or we could, if what we want to allow for personal use is pit or trench composting and vermiculture or vermicomposting, if we were to change that semicolon to a comma, then I think it would be clear that for personal use applies to all those items, pit or trench composting or vermicomposting. So I move we change the semicolon after composting and before or to a comma.
Hang on, before we do that, there was a motion.
Yeah, I move to strike government sanctioned.
Sorry about that.
Government
Okay.
sanction. Was there a second for that?
Nope.
Oh.
Yep.
Connor. So, Lauren?
I'm just thinking about like our restaurants who have to do this. That's not personal use, right? But they have to
That's right.
compost now, so.
But they're all under state regulations what they do with their compost. That's why to me the government sanction is important, because it says there are certain bins and vessels that are composting but aren't for personal use that should be allowed. I don't know if those are the right words, but
So that.
but there is
separated
the
from
bigger
yeah.
bins and vessels.
I could also picture striking just for personal use. But I don't know.
How about this? Maintenance of composting, of a composting bin or vessel in compliance with state law or regulation. So it doesn't suggest that the government is actively blessing your personal bin, but it suggests that in order to not be covered by town regulation, you need to be complying with some higher regulation.
Is that a friendly amendment?
So I would move to amend your motion.
So I can accept that amendment? How does that work?
I don't think so. I think, well, I would.
Officially, but.
Well, if there's no objection to an amendment, then it can
Oh,
be,
okay.
the chair can rule it amended.
Okay, so there's no objection. There's
No
no
objection.
objection. So we're gonna consider that as part of the original motion. Okay, thank you for that clarification. Further discussion on that. So we don't need to, do we need to have it read back, or are we feeling okay about it?
Changing the language to maintenance of a composting bin or vessel in compliance with state law or regulation.
And striking the rest of it? Or keeping the rest of it?
Yeah, keeping the rest of it, but then my motion will be in order after that.
Oh, okay, great. Okay, great. Further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, and Jack?
I moved in the last line of 7-2 to change the semicolon after composting to a comma.
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, great. That was the only flag I had on that one. And oh, so do we need to approve the whole thing now as amended?
Yes, chapter 7.
Chapter 7, it's very exciting.
Don't we have to close the public hearing
Oh, yeah,
before you do
comments
that?
from the public? Thank you.
Good, Jack, good.
It's good, it's good. So comments? Need more of that.
So I'll make a motion that we accept ordinance chapter 7 as amended, final reading.
Okay, and I'm going to close the public hearing.
I thought you did, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, that's okay. And I just want to make sure I actually said that. So there's a motion, and there's there a second?
Second.
Okay, further discussion. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? All right, thank you. Chapter 7, done, yeah. Okay, chapter 8. This is the second public hearing on chapter 8. I'm going to open a public hearing. Lauren.
Section 8.1, did we, in here, we had talked last time about cats, and I don't think it's been addressed. So I think we are still outlying cats running at large in our city if we do this. The cat lobby's gonna come out hard.
You thought the dog lobby was real. Cat lobby.
So just flagging that.
Fair. So do you have any suggestions about that, or should we just, flag it for a future reading?
This would be the last one.
I mean, this is theoretically the second reading, but.
Yeah, we did 4 on the last chapter. How high?
Just saying. Hope springs eternal. We're Just say except
We could
cats.
just,
Yeah.
we could just say except
Yeah.
cats.
So yeah, I think if we said no person owning or who has custody and control of any domestic animal except cats shall permit such animal to go at large, loose or unrestricted in any public street, etc.
Is there a motion?
I move that we change the language
Okay.
in that
Second.
way.
Rolls off the tongue.
Yes, Donna.
I just have to make a statement because I have neighbors in my condo association who would like us to contain cats because they are a nuisance in your flower garden. That's just for the record.
And also, they kill a lot of songbirds, I hear.
Yes.
Keep your cats indoors. Maybe. I don't know. I don't own a cat. I should give advice. Okay. All right, so there's a motion and a second. Further discussion. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. All right, there's that.
All cats, like tigers. Bengals.
Tigers.
Domestic cats.
they
Or it's just
can-
domestic cats.
I think because domestic is in the
I mean, it does say
beginning of the
domestic
sentence.
animals.
Yeah, just be difficult.
So, good question. Yeah. Okay, any, Jack? Yeah?
I just want to be sure, has section 8.3 been discussed with former Councilor Kruger to ensure that it addressed her concern about keeping swine?
So we did not discuss this with Councilmember Kruger. It would address her personal issue because they have 75 acres. We discussed it internally about what to do, and I explained this to Lauren the other day. Some of the other examples that we saw around the state tied it to zoning ordinances. So if you're in the rural district, it's okay, and if you're in the high residential district, it's not okay. But we concluded that it was really about the size of the lot and not about what district you could be in, downtown and have a 10-acre lot. What's the problem? Or you could live in the district that Rosie lives in, but still have a small lot that's right next to your neighbor. So we said, well, what's a reasonable size that you could have pigs and not bother your neighbors? And so I would say there's no science to the 10 acres other than we picked it. Mike Miller has some farming background and suggested 10 acres, but I don't think if you wanted to make it 7 or 5 or whatever,
I'm totally happy with it, I just.
yeah. That was the goal, was so that it wasn't prohibiting them across the city, but it was saying you've got to have enough land to have them.
So my only thought about that was I also recall the comment about singling out swine and talking about how this really does factor in potentially for other large animals as well. I know pigs can be particularly stinky, but any large animal sort of kept in a small enough space could be problematic. So I wondered about instead of calling it keeping swine, just keeping large animals, and no person shall keep large animals within the city limits unless, et cetera. And the reason I was using the phrase large animals is because that is used later on. In section 8, it's new section 6, so new section 8.6 of burying dead animals it references
Other
large animals. Yeah. So thinking of that as a technical term, and actually, to be fair, this is maybe saying too much at the same time, but I wondered if because we use the phrase "or other large animal," if that shouldn't also be defined somewhere under in the definition section of 8202. Yeah. So just to take that sort of one piece at a time, how do you feel about changing it from swine to just large animals?
I think the only question would be would a pig necessarily be a large animal? If I look at these, if I owned a pig and I looked at this list of horse, ass, mule, ox, cow, bull, hog, I'd say, well, my pig's a lot smaller than these things.
Yeah, Donna.
Didn't move it past it.
Move them past what?
You're still talking about the last.
No, we're on 8.
We're
past 7, we're on 8 now.
Okay. To accept cats. Okay, right.
Yep. Cool. Donna.
Just for the record, as you were told before, but likewise, farm girl, pigs are no stinkier than
Yeah, oh, yes,
lambs.
thank you,
Lambs have
thank
a horrible odor on their wool once they mature. Cows, all of them can be if they're not kept right. It's a matter of how much mud is allowed to accumulate. So circumstantially, I mean, you could have llamas, I mean, and they can be even sort of nasty, bless their hearts. So maybe, I mean, you could say, list maybe some of the small ones. I would say farm animals such as swine, sheep, llamas, and larger, or just some examples.
That's a good idea.
But there's no way you're going to be able to list all of them.
Yeah, fair.
Because there are lots of different breeds, anyway.
I like the idea of farm animals too. Yeah.
It might make sense to, well, it's a little complicated because we have the 10-acre thing for swine, but then 8.4, which comes next, talks about horses, but it says, shall not keep such stable in such place or in such manner as to be offensive to residents in the vicinity.
Yeah, and it was actually the language we were trying to get rid of under the swine. It was because that had been the standard before. So you're right, we didn't catch this, and I think it would be good to maybe either put a acreage limit on that, because the problem is who defines what's offensive, and that was the problem we had with our most recent case. Was, is it, in whose opinion is it offensive, and what do you base that on?
So why not?
Yeah, go ahead.
Why not put horses in there with the other
Yeah.
farm animals, and just name them such as?
And then strike all of 8.4.
Yeah. Because it is about how much space that they have to be kept, and to be kept healthy and non-smelly.
And keep the limitation on how much manure you can keep on the premises?
Sure.
Well, I just.
Yeah, that makes sense,
I've
sure.
never had animals like this.
Yeah, they do
but,
accumulate. That's true for any manure of any of these animals. Yep.
So we move that up to 8.3, that last section.
Yeah. So.
Got it.
And do we want to require 10 acres for
Horses.
goats, lambs, sheep, pigs, horses, cows, all of those llamas?
Glenn.
So, not having a farming background in any way, except for little vegetables, 10 acres seemed large to me, even for swine. I feel like my sense of Montpelier lots, maybe 5 would feel more reasonable to me, especially if we're just piling all of the animal categories into one category. Say you have to have 5 acres, at least 5 acres, to keep farm animals. Feels better to me than 10.
It just at 5 acres and slope doesn't give you much mass, and you need mass to keep them moving and keep the grass growing, or the green stuff growing.
So you think it should be 10?
I don't know the perfect, I'm just looking at Montpelier and on all our slopes, and I know how little 5 acres can be when you're on a slope. Michael's not here, so he could help me out. I can do a Google.
Well, 10 acres is approximately, well, let's see. No, never mind.
I mean,
It's not going to help.
I'm aware that I'm not an expert on this, and I would be totally willing to go with the 10. Just struck me as large.
If we get pushback, we can always change it.
Google says it's a good mark of 1 to 2 acres per horse.
I was also thinking
I
about
could
that.
Google every animal and find
Right, like if you have 1 goat, do you need 10 acres? That seems like a lot.
You're not going to have 1 goat. Goats
You're
don't like
not gonna have 1 goat? Okay.
No, they don't like to be single.
Fair enough. Well, so one possibility is that, we've suggested some changes for this language for now. As I understand it, and correct me if you have it differently, but I've got so far that 8.3 would say basically keeping of farm animals, or we had talked about large animals, but keeping of, yeah, go ahead, Lauren.
I was just looking up how Agency of Agriculture defines. So they have a livestock term that includes cattle, horses, sheep, swine, goats, camelids, fallow deer, and red deer. Is their definition of livestock? If we would just want to echo.
I like that, particularly because it doesn't include chickens or ducks, and like a farm animal might include.
Yeah, they have a whole separate poultry section. So.
Okay, are you okay with that, Donna? So
sure.
livestock.
I can email that to you, John.
Okay. Well, actually, with these, Bill usually keeps a running check, and generally you all tend to pass it as amended. So I just take down that motion, and I'll be posting them, so I'll get the details from the check officers.
Okay.
I
So
think it would be a good idea, though, to list some such as, so people get an idea what you're talking about.
I
We can
wonder.
take the such as from
Yeah.
that statute.
Yep. And does it make sense to put it there or in the definitions? 8202, or do you care?
I feel like the definition 8202, that whole section is about dogs, isn't it?
Oh yeah, you're right. Never mind. Okay, yeah. So right, we'll put it in right here. Okay. All right. So it's keeping of livestock. And no person shall keep shall keep livestock within the city limits unless the livestock is
Livestock
kept.
such as.
Oh yes, thank you. Such as, etc. Unless the livestock is kept on a parcel greater than 10 acres of land, and then.
At no time shall permit more than 1/2 quart of manure to accumulate or remain uncovered outside said stable. Or
Okay.
maybe just say remain uncovered, period.
Covered, yeah. Okay, that feels okay to me. How do you all feel? Okay, great. And again, if people have comments about that later, then we'll deal with that later. But for now, it's better than I think what we have here. So,
Yeah. It's a big improvement.
okay, is there a motion regarding basically sections 8.3 and 8.4?
I move that we change them as just now read by the mayor
Or Bill?
or Bill.
Yeah.
Second.
Okay, further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Great. Any other comments on this? I had one more comment to make, which was about section 8.5 poultry, basically saying that poultry has to be kept in an enclosure. I feel like I can think of a place in town where chickens do sometimes run across the road.
Why?
Great question. I don't know. But the thing is, I'm not sure that I don't have strong feelings about that. And if somebody wants to keep chickens sort of open, that's fine with me. But perhaps there's other reasons, like people's gardens or something. I'm not sure. Jack.
I recall there was a time in the 80s or maybe in the 1990s where there was a neighborhood kerfuffle over someone's chickens getting out and running all over the neighborhood. Over on First Street or someplace like that. And that might even be why we have this in here right now. So, you know, my neighbors have chickens. They get out, they get in our yard, and they go across the street, and we don't really care. And I think this really is going to apply if a neighbor does care, but it gives the city a handle to respond if the chickens are becoming a nuisance.
Donna?
Well, even the larger chicken farm that's on the corner before the roundabout by Grossman's. You all know that one up on the hill? It's the one that a lot of chickens get out, but unfortunately, they also get in the road, and it's an accident happening. There's a lot of wire around the field, but it's not totally enclosed. So they do make an attempt to keep them in, but it becomes a safety issue when they get in the road, that's all.
Fair. I guess I'm happy to keep it then. Cool. Yeah.
Now, we have a sheep farm on Berlin Street.
Yeah.
Do
Laura
we know the
Smith-Riva.
acreage she has?
I don't know. I have promised her that I'll go visit her sometime, so maybe I'll go and ask.
Okay, yes, because.
So late.
No, but if it needs a future adjustment. then-
Yeah.
We've done so many changes, we're going to have another hearing? Or not?
Well, I would assume we do that at another time.
Okay.
Probably, seems like we're pretty much done with this one.
Okay,
as well,
okay, so find out, Glenn, and we'll.
Yep. Yeah, I'm happy
I didn't
to.
want to forget about her.
Okay, is there a motion regarding chapter 8?
I move we schedule another public hearing.
I don't think we need a public hearing.
Sure.
This is the second one.
Oh, but we just said we were going to be taking it up again, I thought.
Not necessarily.
Oh, okay.
Glenn was gonna check in, but we could potentially pass this now and then reopen it if we needed to.
It's fine with me. Then I move we pass it as amended.
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, and I'm gonna close the public hearing on that now that we've voted. And okay, so strategic plan update.
So I have a lot to offer. We gave you less information last time at your request. I'm going to confess that I did not do my updates before Jamie printed this and sent it out, despite her urging me to do so. So some may be out of date. We are using this, and as you can see, we've now converted it to the new plan. We've, in part, just because of our staff changes and stuff, we're not on that, and our new assistant manager is going to be the leader of this process. So we expect we'll have more robust conversations on this in the future, but certainly happy to answer any questions anybody has about any of the topics or the updates. And we want to get more narrative update in there so people can read and see what's.
Donna?
I find this format more compressed and helpful. Thank you.
I am under the section regarding overdoses and stats from the. This is
Close to the end, right?
7.1. I'm looking forward to having some data in there. I think that'll be great. I assume that's sort of a placeholder.
Right.
Yep. And that's okay. Just at some point. Okay. Any questions about or comments on this? Okay, great. Well, thank you. And all right, on to council reports. Lauren, would you want to start? If not, I'll bounce over to Donna.
I have
Okay,
a parks
Donna,
announcement.
Donna's gonna go.
So last time I talked about the Parkaloosa. This is the Enchanted Forest at Hubbard Park, October 12th, Saturday, 5:30 to 8. And it is marvelous. It has these different stations with little vignettes being acted out. It's lovely lit, and it's a fun time for families. So please go online, buy your tickets, and you can volunteer to help out because there are about probably 12 to 15 stations, and they need volunteers there to help people because it is dark. And we want to make sure people enter and exit without falling. The other thing is just please, when you park on a street in the city, bring your rear view mirror on the driver's side in on the car. On Berry Street, those 4 inches make a huge difference, as it does downtown and in Elm. So just take the time to bend your rear view mirror towards the car. And the other thing is a mild complaint. I'm still not doing well with the new setup, how to get to the city agenda. And I was not one to complain to Jamie. I've just given up, but it is very frustrating.
Yeah.
It's unpredictable, and particularly on my iPad, which the city wanted me to get in my beginning years of the council, and it's just less and less friendly. So one, if you're going to change something, it would be really helpful to be talked to, and then after you do it, to give us lessons. And then to finalize it, because it keeps changing.
Right.
So that's my
Well,
frustration.
Yeah, it's been frustrating for all of us, and we're trying
Okay.
to work with the vendor for a solution. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, just real quick, working on a draft of the responsible contracting ordinance based on the comments submitted by city staff. I think a lot of those suggestions were very reasonable, so I can make those changes. Also in touch with the city of Portland, Maine, which that ordinance was largely based on, to see if maybe the mayor could testify over the phone at our next meeting there. And perhaps some people in city government, just to see how it plays out, because that'll be most apples to apples for everybody to hear. So that's it.
I wanted to, I think I mentioned last meeting that I am planning to run a drawing class at the TW Wood Gallery for 4 Tuesday evenings, starting October 8th, and then the 15th, 22nd, and 29th, running from 6:30 to 8:30. Drawing from observation, how to draw everything. I'm looking forward to it. I encourage anyone who's interested to come, or if you know someone who should have some fun with it, send them to the TW Wood Gallery's website. I've really enjoyed working with the Wood as a council representative to the board, and this feels like a good way to contribute to their program and have some fun. Otherwise, I'll be at Baggitos as usual tomorrow, 8:30 to 9:30. If anyone has anything else they want to talk about, I'm enjoying that as well.
At one of our previous meetings on ordinance review, we talked about the various things that our ordinances require licenses for, and I have a conversation scheduled next week with S. Lauren Hibbert, who's the Director of Licensing at the Secretary of State's office, and we're going to be talking about approaches to licensing and why we might want or not want to license certain things. So I'll have that to add to our conversation when we take it up again.
Just briefly, one event coming up that might be on Ann's report as well, but Wednesday, October 2nd, 6 to 8:30 p.m. Here at City Hall, the Vermont Energy and Climate Action Network and Regional Planning Commission are organizing a gathering of energy committees from around the region and looking at transportation, which I know there's been lots of great conversations on lately, so it should be fun to hear about what some of the other groups in our region are also thinking about and working on. So again, that's October 2nd, 6 to 8:30 p.m. here at City Hall. And then just wanted to share that the Energy Efficiency Ordinance Group is hard at work and plugging away, so really excited to bring forward that work along with Ann and many others from the community that are diligently working on that. And so just stay tuned, but it isn't being forgotten.
Thank you. I'm going to tack on to that just a little bit, which is to say that working group is, we met today, and one of the outcomes of today's meeting was that we're at the point where we're going to start to draft some language. And just so you're aware, sort of thinking of breaking this up into two parts, one being ordinance language and one being like an implementation policy. The idea being the policy would be much easier to adapt or change as we learn and grow, and that the ordinance would be more, sort of here's the broad requirements, but referencing this policy as to the specifics. So that's sort of the frame of that. Thank you for mentioning the transportation thing on the 2nd. Should be a great event here. Also, just looking backwards a little bit, we had a great Montpelier Drive Electric Week a couple Saturdays ago. It was a kind of a gray day, but I think we had a good turnout for the weather, so that was awesome. I also just want to commend the police department for just their work and how they handled the strike last Friday. I know it was an inconvenience for people, but everyone stayed safe, and that matters. So I'm very grateful for that. And then, yeah, and I mean, I guess along with that, so grateful for young people and adults raising that as an issue. It's like the most pressing issue of our time. So thank you for everyone who, raised their voice there. And then there was one other thing I was going to point out. Nope, maybe that is, oh yeah, there is one other thing. A little further out, October 9th is the ribbon cutting, I suppose, for the Taylor Street project. So very exciting. There's going to be a little ceremony, I think starting at 4 p.m. there. So, come out to that. There's going to be, I think, some tours of the space shortly thereafter. So should be pretty exciting. I'm really looking forward to it. So that's the only other thing I wanted to put on everybody's radar. Joe.
I just want to apologize for getting testy. I can handle the rambly motions I have for 7.5 years. Just don't ask me to read them back.
Cool, thank you.
Just first, just got an update. Sounds like our water leak on Nelson Street is pretty bad. Street collapsed. So, yeah, there will not be water tonight, and pretty serious. We were fortunate or lucky, I guess, that the crew was out tonight doing overnight paving work on Stonecutters. We actually had a lot of people out in the area and were able to respond quickly, so it is shut off. But so it's pretty severe. Just quickly, I'd also like to comment. One thing people missed, so I'll clean up. Was we also had a really wonderful transportation forum last week.
Oh, yes.
Here, I appreciate all the groups that participated and the people that were here. I thought it was interesting. We all learned a lot, and a lot of exciting options coming forward. Just not to get into it too deeply, but with regard to the comments at the beginning of the meeting, and about City Center, we actually did look at the file. We don't find any requirement that City Center had to have public bathrooms or parking. We looked through the entire file. We reported that to the individual who requested it, and the law says you either that you can make it available to them. And so we said either if you want to pay the cost of this huge file, or you're welcome to come in under business hours and look at it. And so we have not denied him access at all, and we did check both the land records and the files to see if there was any requirement that somehow we were missing. We didn't see it, but just thought people would want to know that there was more to it.
But Bill, what about the recent court case that said you didn't have to pay for public records in Vermont?
Yeah, well, we haven't got, yes, it had to do with the paying for the
Police in
police, thank you,
Burlington.
the body cams.
Okay, so
But-
it didn't
and
hit
they-
all the
and that
rest?
was- So the current law says that actual direct costs that you
I know
can't-
it does.
Apparently you can't
Yeah.
charge for, sounded to me like, your own time and those sorts of things. I don't know how that affects.
Okay.
But we're complying by saying
No, that's.
you can see them. We're not withholding the records
Yep.
from him.
Okay.
We're not required in this case to make copies.
I
So if he
understand.
wants to have them made, that's great. We'll have them made for him, but that is beyond what we're required to provide.
Okay.
So I just want people to be clear, we were not in any way, shape, or form denying anybody a records request or ignoring the issues raised. So the last thing is the council meetings in October. Normally, we would meet on the 9th and 23rd. And I popped that out in an email there. For the 9th, the issue is actually really is the 3rd and the 4th. I'll be at Town Fair, 2nd and 3rd, and then Jamie has a training thing on the 3rd and the 4th, so she won't be here. And that's our last week when we don't have any assistant managers. So, putting together the agenda for the 9th would be a struggle. We could probably get it out Monday, the 7th. So if people are okay with that, that's the only problem with having it on the 9th, is just getting everything together and out for the agenda. On the 23rd, I will not be here. I'll be away at my annual conference, and I booked all that before I knew Sue was leaving. Cameron will be working here, but as I said, it'll be her 16th day. I don't know if we want to put her up here then. She's pretty feisty, but we'll see how that goes. I don't know if you know. So we could either move that date or try to keep the agenda super light, I guess would be the other option. So I just want to throw those out, make sure you're aware that these conflicts existed and whatever works. I asked Ashley, and she said she didn't really have a strong preference either way. But obviously, if people do have conflicts, then there's no reason we can't hold them on the normal dates, except there's snags with both of them.
Well, I would like to have the 9th on the 9th if possible, and I'm willing to have the material come to me late Monday when the staff can get it ready.
On the same page?
Yeah, I hate to rush you on that, Bill, but I think I'm on that too.
That's fine. As long as people don't, as long as there's pre-understanding that it'll come out Monday, then we're good. I mean, if that was the
Late Monday,
concern.
5 o'clock.
Well, we get a lot of it done in advance anyway, but that's fine.
Okay, so,
So
and
staying on the
Lauren,
9th?
Yeah, 9th is better. This was my first time I was gonna say, I would need childcare for the, if it was the 16th. So we can avoid that, having to.
Okay,
see if we can
so
figure
we're gonna
out,
keep it on the 9th then, and just know that we're gonna get our packets a little late. Okay, and then the 23rd, what do you?
Moving to the 30th.
30th is fine with me.
It's fine, yeah.
You
And
won't
I
see
think-
me because I'm going to be at the Zen Buddhist monastery for 2 weeks.
Oh,
Right
well,
then.
And then you won't be testing anymore.
Right, I'll be one with the whole room.
Well, and
You'll
the-
just bring back one of those sticks.
Well, and the 23rd was the day before Thanksgiving anyway, right?
Well, this is October 23rd.
Oh, it was October. I'm
Yeah,
a
we-
month
we
off.
had
Never mind.
another,
We've
Jack did
already
bring up.
planned to move the November,
Oh, okay,
December
thank you.
meetings because of the holiday.
Thank you.
Yes.
Ooh, it's definitely. It's not even 9 o'clock.
It might be the Zen Buddhist Thanksgiving.
Well,
I don't know.
no,
Yeah,
but
right.
Jack did bring up the Thanksgiving,
Yeah,
which
and
would be good to look at now if
we
we
already
could.
we have always scheduled that. If we haven't, I guess we haven't officially done it, but typically we meet the 3rd Wednesday, which would be the 20th instead of the 27th, because that is the night before Thanksgiving of November. Usually when we give you your budget schedule, those are in there. And the same thing, obviously, with December, the 4th one is actually the 25th this year. So unless you
Let's
all
skip
want,
that night.
you want to meet on Christmas night.
Awesome.
That could be great.
So
you know, a small crowd. Get a lot
Before
done.
we leave it though, so are we okay with moving to the 30th of September instead of the 23rd?
30th of
October.
October.
Oh my goodness.
We have you totally confused.
Yeah, I'm sorry. 30th of October instead of the 23rd.
Yes.
Sure, that's a good.
Okay, sorry. Whew, okay.
And then we would be
That
the
one's good.
13th and 20th of November instead of the 13th and 27th.
Yes.
And we would be the 11th and 18th of December instead of the 11th and 25th.
Oh, I'm
Yes.
sorry, I'm just putting this in my calendar. Can you say the December ones again?
11th and 18th.
11th and 18th. Great, perfect.
And that's consistent with our practice
What we've
the
done.
last
Yep.
25 years.
Okay. Feeling set.
Feeling set.
Yeah,
Well, thank
for
you
the
for
next-
accommodating that on the 23rd and 30th. That's great.
Get talking about December, and all I can think is budget.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Let's go back to September.
Okay, I think that concludes our regular business. So, without objection, we'll consider the meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Well done.
Was that-